Hey, everybody, welcome to tonight's show on Free for All. Tonight we're going to be diving into the question nobody in Washington really wants to touch. What happens when the president stops treating the justice system like a constitutional guardrail and starts treating it like a weapon instead? Trump's personal lawyers are running the Justice Department. Justices are getting threatened with impeachment, and politically charged cases are blowing up in court. Let's face it, this isn't a left versus right, liberal versus conservative issue. This is a rule of law versus the rule of one man issue. So let's get into it tonight on Free for All, shall we? All right, everyone, welcome to tonight's episode of Free for All. I am your host, Big John, and tonight is a little bit of a departure. First of all, I want to say outright, if you've joined us here on Free for All on Distant Warrior Network, looking for me and the Hodester, Hody Johns, you're not going to get Hody tonight. He had something come up, and he just couldn't make the show. He was really sorry he couldn't make it. But not as sorry as you guys are, because due to his not being able to make the show, you're just left to stare at this for the whole episode. So if you have any complaints, just send them over to the Hode Man, at the Hode Man on X, because you having to stare at this mug for the next hour or so is definitely his fault. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemies. All right. If you're watching the show tonight on YouTube, X, or Facebook, please feel free to join us in the chat. Send us your comments, your feedback, questions, anything you got. I'll be happy to talk to you tonight. And also, if you don't mind, why don't you give us a subscription? Why don't you click the subscribe button? If you're on YouTube, you could hit it right there. If you're on X, hit the follow button for Distant Warrior. Or, if you want to do it later in the show, you're too interested in what I have to say for right now, later on, you could just use your phone and scan that little QR code up there. That'll take you to our YouTube subscription page. It's totally free. Or on the scroll, all the way at the bottom down there, you'll see all the information on how to subscribe. It doesn't seem like much, but it really does help us out. It helps us to keep going and producing these episodes, these shows, Free for All, and also Liberty Lens with Mike Termott. So if you don't mind, why don't you help us out and hit the follow or subscribe button, depending on where you are. All right, so tonight's show is going to be uh, really a subject that I've been complaining about for a while. If you watched this week's Liberty Lens episode with Mike Termott, that show, and check it out, by the way, if you haven't so far, go to distantwarrior.com, check out the latest Liberty Lens show, or go to YouTube. Check it out there at our channel at Distant Warrior. The Liberty Lens episode was about the Epstein fiasco and what appears to be President Trump's strange reluctance to release all the Epstein information, the so-called Epstein files, right? First, while he was running for president, he promised to be fully transparent. Then he gets into office between Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and Trump himself. Not a lot forthcoming. Really started to split his MAGA base right down the middle as to people who supported him and didn't support him. But that got us to thinking: is it just the Epstein issue, or is it the issue of Trump's relationship with the judiciary? Now, there are a lot of folks, and I might be inclined to agree with some of them on some level, that Trump, as a private citizen, may have been mistreated a bit uh, by the justice system. I'm not one of those that believes he has been railroaded at every turn. I believe that if you're Trump and you've been playing hardball, and you've been, let's face it, you've been an a-hole to everybody that you've come into contact with, it's not unexpected that they're going to take every opportunity to make life difficult for you, right? So to that extent, that's not surprising at all. However, what is surprising at least to me and to many others, is the level to which the judicial branch in this country now is completely and utterly under attack, both from without and within, by the Trump administration. So I wanted to talk about that. And I also wanted to bring up a couple of instances. And like I said, certainly send us your comments, send us your questions as I'm talking here. I'd love to get your thoughts on what I'm saying. So the first thing is Trump's approach to the law. Philosophically speaking, he is definitely the I'll ask for forgiveness later type, right? He's going to try to push the bounds of what is legally permissible for him to do, what has been traditionally acknowledged as being permissible for him to do. And he's going to keep pushing, pushing, pushing until the Supreme Court tells him to stop. And even then, he may not stop, right? But he will at least push it until every single issue gets to the Supreme Court. Now, of course, the political spin from this is, from the left, you're going to get like, oh, this guy doesn't know what the Constitution is, which I tend to agree with. I don't think he's read the Constitution. I don't think he actually cares about the Constitution. So you have the left pushing from that angle, but also from the right. Basically, any objection, any legal objection to any of Trump's nonsense is viewed as a judicial coup. It's viewed as activist judges. And this goes back not just to the beginning of his current administration, but his first administration as well. We all remember him attacking the ethnicity of judges who disagreed with him, attacking the ethnicity and the competency of judges who ruled against him. But it wasn't as turned up as it is now. So you have a president and his inner circle who, who are just have zero use for the judicial branch, especially when it rules against them. So in that context, then the person he picked to lead the DOJ becomes very important to all Americans because that person has to, in theory, be as independent as possible from the president. Now, that should be true in any case. Functionally, however, we know it's not true, right? Attorney generals are political creatures as well. They serve at the pleasure of the president, and the president can fire them basically at will. Uh, DOJ, the head of the DOJ is also uh, not typically, is appointed and approved by the Senate, right? So these are supposed to be some checks and balances, and obviously, look, in theory, if the president fires an attorney general who appears to be doing their job and is fired simply for political reasons, there's always the cause of the path for impeachment. There's also the political blowback that typically happens, and in the past, that served to keep a pretty much a rein on uh, the activities of the attorney general and the relationship the attorney general has with the president. But in this case, we see a lot of other twists. Uh, Historically speaking, uh, John F. Kennedy caught a lot of crap for appointing his brother Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s dad, to be the attorney general during Kennedy's administration. Um, at the time, though, even though there was initial blowback for obviously based on nepotism, something Trump is not immune and has done himself, whether it was putting his daughter in charge of something to do at the White House or Jared Kushner being a senior advisor or things like that. But but I think when Bobby Kennedy was in office, obviously I was born after JFK's assassination. Clearly, despite all the gray hair, I wasn't alive during Bobby Kennedy's tenure as AG. However, from what I've been able to gather, he was viewed not as someone who was pursuing necessarily partisan relief on the part of his brother, but rather someone who, if anything, was overly zealous, and overly zealous perhaps in what at the time was progressive causes, civil rights, uh, and also he was very active, obviously, in trying uh, to get tough on organized crime. So I don't think you had the same situation with Bobby Kennedy and his older brother being the president, as you do with, in what we have, Pam Bondi and Donald Trump. Now, in case anyone's forgotten, Pam Bondi was a personal lawyer of the president. She's the one who helped defend him during his impeachment. Okay, so this is someone that he's picked. And look, at least she had some experience. She had experience in Florida in government, and I think she was Attorney General of Florida as well. So it's not outrageous that he selected Bondi. She's the same political bent as he is. And certainly she did what every Trump cabinet appointee, as we now know, had to do, which was she was willing to pledge a loyalty oath to the president, which is a bit of a problem, right? Like anyone who works in government does not pledge a personal loyalty oath to the president or to anyone else. They pledge a personal loyalty and oath to the Constitution, to defend and protect the Constitution, not to defend and keep Donald Trump out of trouble, not to defend and do the president's bidding, right? Yes, they functionally do that, but that's not what they are there ultimately to do. So, depending on how much of a Pollyanna you are or not, that's an important distinction to have. Now, Pam Bondi is someone who's been problematic, right? Because what's happened ever since she's gotten, she was approved by the Senate, but ever since she's gotten in office, no one's been happy with her performance. And by no one, I don't mean just people who are opposed to Trump, but people who are pro-Trump, pro-MAGA, don't particularly care for Bondi because she seems like she has no will of her own. She is just there to be a pretty mouthpiece for the president and to just be there and repeat whatever the president has to, wants her to say, right? She is literally, or whether she is or not, she gives the appearance of being nothing more than a puppet on strings for Trump or whoever's, controlling Trump. So, you see examples of this, right? She fired the attorney general, the U.S. attorney. I'm sorry, the U.S. attorney, the Southern District of New York, within a month or two of her taking office. Why? Because she claimed he was holding out information on the Epstein files. That he was hiding a trove of material on Epstein that he didn't want anyone to get because it implicated Democrats and all that. She fired the guy slash he resigned. Take your pick. She ordered Cash Patel to go to New York and raid all the SDNY office. We're still waiting for what the guy was allegedly hiding, right? We're still waiting for that. We're still waiting for the Epstein files, right? Despite the vote, and we could talk about that in a few minutes. Despite the vote the other day in Congress, uh, we're still waiting. We're still waiting for clarity on what really was in the Epstein files, right? We saw that Trump accidentally made public what should have been a direct message on Truth Social from himself to Bondi, where he was just saying, "Hey, why don't I see indictments for Comey, Letitia James, Adam Shifty Schiff?" Right? Like he literally sent her a list of people that he wanted indicted for no other reason that they were political opponents of his. Now, I know you could be cynical and say, well, did Biden's administration do the same against Trump? Probably. Did Obama's administration do that against Trump? Probably. But there's a little bit of a distinction here, eh? One is it wasn't as brazen as this, right? Whether you view this as a positive or a negative, the public facing image was that they're investigating Trump for ties, and I don't, that's a separate episode as to, the validity of what Biden and Obama's administrations may have done and who was responsible for what. Here, you have a very public declaration by the president, and he's not shy about it. It's not like him accidentally sending that thing, making it public instead of sending a direct message to Bondi. It hasn't slowed him down. He openly calls for these people to be indicted. So you have Bondi who then is like, yeah, okay, I guess I have to do it, whatever, whatever. So when you see a lot of these MAGA people, and this is the feedback loop, right? Because Bondi is, she's repeating what the president tells her to say. She says things like, "Oh, these criminals, and we're going to get indictments, and this and that." And then when the facts don't back that up, you know, when the rubber hits the road, Where are the indictments? Well, she knows she'll get laughed out of court, regardless of who the judge is, whether it's a Republican judge, a Trump appointee, or a Biden appointee. It doesn't matter. A lot of these things get laughably thrown out of court. Federal indictments have something like a 99.4% success rate historically. The old adage about, being able to indict a ham sandwich applies, even though it was said by a New York district attorney, it actually applies even more on the federal level. Like, nobody escapes a federal indictment, right? Trump's Trump's DOJ has suffered some really embarrassing losses. Their indictments in some cases are getting thrown out of court, either on procedural grounds where, they'll say like, this is the most comically produced indictment I've ever seen, like statutory things that weren't filled out correctly, uh, uh, mass numbers of DOJ lifers, career prosecutors resigning in protest over the incompetent uh, U.S. attorneys that are being put in place by Trump. And at the top of this is Bondi, and she can't shake any of this, right? She's responsible for a lot of this because she oversees this nonsense. Um, but it's not just Bondi, right? There's a whole slew of people that when you read off their names, you start to see a pattern, and you start to see a pattern in what the president is trying to accomplish, right? So let's start out with, like I said, we had Pam Bondi here, and let me just bring this up for those that don't know. That's uh, Attorney General Pam Bondi, right? Um, and I'll bring up their pictures because maybe I'll let you guys decide if there's any other patterns you spot, right? But so Pam Bondi, we just talked about her. Now, part of what she does is she helps oversee all the other U.S. attorneys um, that are sprinkled throughout all the districts and states around the country, right? Now, a high profile appointment that was made was someone else, Jeanine Pirro. Now she's Judge Jeanine from TV, big talking head on Fox. When she did her fake courtroom show and everything, she was like, "Oh, I'm tough on crime," this and that. Well, Jeanine Pirro, she's the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. She was put in place to make sure that Trump's militarization of the police, the occupation of Washington D.C., got the results he wanted, right? This isn't a case necessarily of saying, well, who is the most qualified person for the job that happens to align with the president's ideology, right? Not the case here. They wanted, Trump wanted someone in that position that would turn a blind eye to any shenanigans that might take place once the National Guard was moved into Washington, D.C. And of course, we saw how ridiculous and how political this appointment was in the case of Sandwich Guy. Like, right? So we call him the Sandwich Guy. I'm sure everyone remembers. It's the case where this guy holding a Subway hero wrapped in wax paper started yelling at some of the National Guardsmen that were occupying Washington, D.C. And at the end of it, he chucked the sandwich, bounced off the guy's bulletproof tactical vest, and then he ran away. Right? Um, Laughably, not only did they send like a 20-person SWAT team to arrest the guy in his apartment, by the way, after he offered to turn himself in, right? He offered to go in on his own. They said, no, stay home. And they went and got him, complete with social media cameras and a 20-person SWAT team, like I said. Well, that was Sean Dunn, was the name of the guy who tossed the sandwich. Jeanine Pirro, in prosecuting the case, decided that this was felony assault. And on the previous free for all, Hody and I went over it. It was a ridiculous charge. It was so ridiculous that they couldn't get an indictment. And again, keep in mind, federal prosecutors can literally indict ham sandwiches usually if they wanted to, at least the ones that know what they're doing. But in this case, They tried getting this guy on felony assault. It was laughed out of court. They couldn't get an indictment. So they re-indicted him on a misdemeanor. That went to court and they lost miserably. Okay. Now you might say, well, Big John, that's just one case. Maybe it was a little bit overzealous. While arrests in DC have basically been flat since the previous year, meaning Trump's nonsense with moving in the National Guard and everything really hasn't yielded in many more arrests. They have resulted, though, in fewer convictions, meaning not only are they not arresting more people, they're they're arresting people that they can't get indictments on, they can't get convictions on. Now, the hard numbers aren't in yet; those usually lag by about a year or so. But if you hear of more than, say, 3 or 4 of these things getting tossed out of court, that is a remarkable failure rate, for federal prosecutors. It just never happens, right? So you have someone like Jeanine Pirro, and you might say to yourself, well, maybe he owes her something. Maybe she talked nice about Trump on Fox, and she's a Trump supporter and all that. But politics is politics, right? Patronage is patronage. But the thing you have to keep in mind is that in these types of appointments, it's largely ceremonial. Theoretically, you would get Pirro, she'd get up in front of a camera and say, "Oh, nobody's like," and like she did actually, "Nobody's above the law." You might think throwing a sandwich at a law enforcement officer who risks his life is funny and worth a laugh, but we'll see how you're laughing behind bars and things like that. Like, all right, do that in front of the cameras, and then the real prosecutors, the line prosecutors, the guys who actually go to court, the guys who actually fill out the paperwork, who submit the indictments and have to stand before judges, those guys would never ever go for an indictment on this. At worst, they'd give the guy a fine, a summons and a fine, right? Or maybe some community service. They would never take this to court because they know the likelihood of getting a conviction is low. It's not guaranteed. And literally part of their job description is that they should only bring forth cases. They should only take on cases and pursue cases that are likely to end in a conviction for the person they're indicting, right? So they're just wasting the court's time. Now, another person that Trump decided, and I'm assuming Bondi because she rubber stamps these choices, is someone we remember from here in my home state of New York, Alina Habba. Now, for those of you that might not remember, Alina Habba was the particularly annoying lawyer who was the mouthpiece during Trump's civil suit uh, with E. Jean Carroll, the woman who accused him of sexual misconduct, right? She was the one who would always be the mouthpiece in front of the cameras because, it is also legal strategy, right? When you have a man accused of sexually assaulting or sexual misconduct with a female against a female, one of the strategies is one of your lawyers should always be a female, right? Because in terms of perception, that tells people, he isn't that much of a monster because, hey, look, a woman's defending him. Would a woman defend someone that she knew was a sexual predator? It's base psychology. It's almost like a fait accompli. It's a rubber stamp decision. You always have a woman as part of the legal defense team in these types of cases. But she was particularly annoying, right? She would be in front of the cameras when Trump was under a gag order. She would be doing all the talking for him. She would be saying the outrageous nonsense. She would be in front of the cameras, like really screeching like a banshee. Just an unpleasant person to have to listen to, right? As can be expected, she was rewarded for her loyal service to the president uh, as a private citizen. So she would be a second lawyer after Bondi that we talked about. She's a second lawyer, uh, personal lawyer of Trump's in civilian life who made her way into the U.S. attorney's roles. She was named the interim U.S. attorney for New Jersey, right? Now, that's because she wasn't getting appointed in the Senate right away. Remember, the Senate was very slow in going through Trump's nominees for cabinet positions. So she was made the interim U.S. attorney in New Jersey, which is perfectly legal. It's Trump's right to do. When her, I think it's 120 days, when her 120-day interim appointment came up, she was not. anywhere near being um, approved in the Senate. So then there's this little known thing that happens in these cases where the existing judges um, in the circuit can vote to extend the appointment of the interim U.S. attorney. Um, Nobody in New Jersey wanted to extend her, regardless if it was a Trump appointee, a Democrat, an appointee from a Democrat president, nothing. Nobody felt that she was even remotely qualified to be the U.S. attorney. She was horrible at it. She continues to be horrible. So Bondi and Trump came up with a great plan. They named a different interim U.S. attorney, had her as had Habba as the second in command to the newly named interim attorney, then almost immediately turned around and fired the interim attorney, which elevated Habba again to the interim U.S. attorney. And this was, obviously, this is just a workaround to keep her from getting kicked out of office, right? Well, there was a lawsuit about it, an injunction, and there's already been a judge who has ruled that she is acting there. She is serving in her position unlawfully. Now, I don't have to tell you that, and they're still battling over it. This is an exposure for the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey, right? Because if she stays on and participates in cases and rulings, and then is later found to have been acting unlawfully in that position, then that means anything she was involved with gets tainted right away. Okay. Now, why would you have this harpy? Why would you die on a hill for her? Okay. And I'm not saying for any reason other than she doesn't seem to be a very competent lawyer, or at least I should say a very competent prosecutor, right? Lawyer, she might be perfectly effective in what she does as a, for civil cases. But I'm saying for what she was installed to do, she's clearly not doing a credible job. Um, like I said, the judges in the circuit said, we don't want to extend her, right? So you have Trump's DOJ now, where he's ceding. He learned from the first administration, you know, I can't have judges think that they can control me. If I want to do something unconstitutional, I got to have a couple of judges in my pockets, like so much change in his pockets, like from the Godfather movie, right? So Habba is another one in New Jersey. That's still going on, but clearly someone who was not competent for the position. All right. But it doesn't end there. You would think it might end there after Bondi and Pirro and Habba, but no, there's more. In the Eastern District of Virginia, which is I would say after the Southern District of New York, EDVA is probably the second most important or high profile jurisdiction, right? SDNY has all the financial crimes and white collar crimes. A lot of that stuff comes out of SDNY or gets handled by SDNY. EDVA is known as the Rocket Docket, and it's where things involving the government and questions about government trials and things like that get adjudicated as the EDVA. So that's where spy cases go, for example. That's where if any congressmen get in trouble, if there's shenanigans in terms of abiding by the Constitution, anything that has to do with the federal government like that, typically will get adjudicated in EDBA. It's called the Rocket Docket because the judges there have a lot to go through, and they don't put up with nonsense. You're in, you're out. You file your paperwork, you're out. You state your case, you're out. They're not there for theatrics. It's not like in SDNY where there's tons of cameras and like with Habas holding like 2-hour press conferences afterwards to rail about how everyone hates Donald Trump. Like they don't put up with that in EDVA, right? It's you're in, you're out. There was um, a U.S. attorney there, a Republican, who was well respected by both sides of the aisle. So much so that when he moved from interim U.S. attorney, I believe appointed by Trump, um, he was okayed by both the governor and the two senators, uh, Democrats in there, uh, to become the permanent U.S. attorney. Now that's see in the history and tradition of the Senate, when they approve these U.S. attorneys, there's like this unwritten law. There's this tradition, if you will, which is like if the home state senators, either one of the two, object to the proposed U.S. attorney for their state, it doesn't even leave the committee. The person's nomination is dead on arrival. So the first relatively low hurdle a U.S. attorney passes is, hey, the home state senators have to be on board. So this guy was approved. He was set up for his nomination, and he got into the position. Well, the problem was that as soon as he got into the position, he was faced with demands from both the president and the U.S. Attorney General that he go out and get indictments on the president's enemies. Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, James Comey, the former FBI director, Congressman, now Senator Schiff, right? These were marching orders. So here's the problem. The guy did his due diligence. He went out there and um, he tried to get evidence of wrongdoing. He tried to find something that was indictable and had a reasonable chance of resulting in a conviction, right? Because remember, I said that's part two of what U.S. attorneys do. It's not just a matter of getting an indictment; it's securing an indictment that's likely to lead to a conviction, right? This guy reported back and said, "Look, I forget his name was Eric something. I apologize. It should be here in my notes. I've been trying to find them while I've been talking, and I can't find it. But and he came back and said, "Look, I can't indict any of those people. They've really done nothing wrong. There's nothing here other than some minor paperwork mistakes. Nothing that would lead to a conviction. I really don't think we should try to indict them." Well, what happened in that situation? Trump lost his mind, fired the guy. Now, again, as is, it reminds you of high school. When a couple breaks up in high school, right? Uh, I dumped him. I dumped her. At the end of the day, Trump says he fired the guy. The guy says he resigned. Take your choice. I guess functionally it doesn't matter. He was out. And who was named interim U.S. attorney for EDVA? The lead prosecutor for the Rocket Docket in the second highest profile jurisdiction there in the country. Well, that would be this woman right here, Lindsay Halligan. Now, who is Lindsay Halligan, you might say? Is she some state level DA? Is she some super successful prosecutor who put away a ton of criminals? Is she some fancy corporate lawyer who's very adept at finding out about mortgage frauds and financial misdealings and things of that nature? Oh, why, no, no, no. She was President Trump's I don't know, real estate lawyer from at Mar-a-Lago. Basically, her big claim to fame was that because she had a Florida bar license, they put her on Trump's defense team when he was trying to fight the stolen documents case in Florida. Right. So basically, what happened was when Trump's legal all-star team assembled, uh, you apparently need someone who's admitted to the bar in the state the trial is taking place in. Like you can't just import anybody willy nilly, right? At least somebody on that team has to be, I guess, and I'm not a lawyer, so forgive me if the term isn't right, the attorney of record of some sort, where it has to be someone who's admitted to the bar, in this case in Florida. Well, that happened to be her. So she got put on the team. She has no prosecutorial experience, no criminal experience, as far as I can tell. She certainly hasn't held any office like state DA, city DA, prosecute, nothing like that. Well, she gets put in charge of this, and in very short order, says we need to get indictments on Letitia James, James Comey, and Adam Schiff. A lot of people in her office, again, career prosecutors, line prosecutors, the guys who actually have to go to court, said there's nothing here for us to do. You're not going to get an indictment. You won't win any of these cases. She decided to actually be the one to try to file the. Now, I can't tell you how extraordinarily rare it is for the actual U.S. attorney to go try to get these indictments in front of a grand jury in person in these cases, right? It's just rare. That's why you have all these assistants and all these assistant U.S. attorneys and everything, right? Because they're the ones that you get a whole staff of them, and they're the ones who plow through these cases and plow. They're also the ones that have experience. They're the ones that the judges recognize, and So if you wanted a favorable outcome, you would send a prosecutor or U.S. attorney that understands the judges that they're appearing in front of. This woman did not, right? So initially, she couldn't get indictments. Then, in what is almost comical, um, it she and I'm sorry, I'm looking down at my notes here. She tried to file these indictments, and just recently, um, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so used to having Hody jump in while I read my notes. So I apologize, everyone. But basically, she filed these indictments herself. They were not very well done. She was rebuked by the judge. She was also not well versed in how to phrase these things and how to fill out the actual paperwork. And now there's been a ruling that the indictment that she got was not the indictment that was presented to the grand jurors. That somewhere in the paperwork trail, she or someone in her office or someone under her direction, take your pick, actually swapped out what should have been the indictment for something else. So the indictment that the grand jurors saw isn't the indictment that was filed. Of course, and this was in the for the James Comey situation. Comey's team has jumped on this, and they're like, this is misconduct. This should be tossed out now. This shouldn't even be an indictment. So it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens in Virginia, right? Because again, what this president prizes is not competency. It's not efficiency. It's not some silly notion of the truth or of justice, right? What President Trump prizes and values really more than anything else is loyalty. We've seen this, and in his mind, after he lost to Biden, he kind of made a list to himself and he said, things that cost me the 2020 election. Like, and this is a list he made when the cameras weren't on, right? When the cameras are on, the reasons he lost is stolen election, uh, I don't know, Russians, uh, uh, hoaxes, whatever. Like any wacky conspiracy theory you could lay your hands on, that was the reason he lost when the camera was on. When the cameras were off, though, his advisors put together a list of what it was that, in their view, sabotaged his administration and sabotaged his chances uh, for a win in 2020. One of those things of interest to us as libertarians was that he blamed the Libertarian Party in several swing states like Wisconsin, right? Because what happened was the Libertarian Party, the candidate Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen, uh, had beaten the spread, meaning the difference between Trump and Biden in that swing state. If you took that percentage difference where Trump came in second, the Libertarian Party beat that percentage, right? So in his mind, it was like if these libertarians weren't running, all those votes would have come to Trump. And that's where you had the birth of let's send infiltrators like Mr. and Mrs. McCardle and Michael Hayes into the LP to deliver it to the Republican Party, to deliver it to Trump, right? That that was, I think, that's my opinion, but it kind of lines up with what happened and what we've seen, right? But more importantly, the second thing or the first thing on the list was judges. Were It was the court system, right? Because in his mind, it was judges, it was the court system that didn't let him put in a fake slate of electors. It was courts and judges that said that Mike Pence couldn't like automatically refuse to certify the election in the Senate as the sitting vice president. He was upset that the courts ruled against him in Georgia. He was upset that he wasn't allowed to just add 11,000 to his tally in Georgia. We all remember the infamous call he made to the Secretary of State there, right? So when he sat back and said, what prevented me from ruling again in 2020? He came up with Libertarian Party to a lesser extent, but to a much greater extent, I think he and his team viewed the judicial branch as something that has got to go because the judicial branch keeps bringing up that pesky constitution and keeps ruling against all his wacky John Eastman inspired conspiracy theory judicial theories, right? So that's literally what you had going on. And I got to give them credit. This time around, they put in an action plan. They put in a plan, right? It's like make the Libertarian Party irrelevant completely, discredit them, make sure they don't support anybody, make sure the Libertarian nominees, their own party doesn't support them. Check, we got that done. I got them to invite me to their nominating convention. Check, got that, right? And then the other thing they did was we have to attack the judicial branch early and often once we get into office, which is what they've done, right? We've seen the language, right? Activist judges are traitors to the country. Activist judges, liberal judges, Democrat judges need to be impeached. They need to go. Not because they're corrupt, not because they've been there for too long. The only reason is they rule against Trump, right? We see that, look, his primary target among the judges is Judge Boasberg, Judge James Boasberg, uh, because he was the one who said, hey, uh, Trump administration, you can't use an 18th century wartime um, law, something that was written in the 18th century during wartime, to justify mass deportation of immigrants, right? Okay, you disagree with his ruling. You can have your political talking heads go on there and say how wrong he is, and you're going to appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court, just like with everything Trump does. Fair enough. That's part and parcel. That's part of the game. It's the political game. But now it's more than that, right? They are attacking the credibility of the judicial system itself. And the way you do that is by saying any judge that doesn't see the law the way we do, the way Trump does, is by definition an activist judge, is by definition a traitor to the United States, is by definition someone who should be impeached. And we're seeing that already, right? All the MAGA lemmings in Congress, with the possible exception of two or three people, maybe, are in there drafting articles of impeachment against Boasberg. They're finding lower court judges to do the same thing. And honestly, it doesn't even matter if they were appointed by Biden, Obama, Trump himself, Ronald Reagan in some cases, Bill Clinton, because these guys are on the bench for a long, they're there for life basically, and he's looking to impeach anybody who stood up against him. And I have to tell you, I'm wondering if a lot of this is starting to have an effect because these judges, by and large, look, let's face it, they're political creatures. They don't want to be the ones who go down in the history books for being impeached, right? Um, and removed from the bench under a cloud of suspicion, even if it's completely unwarranted, right? This continuous hammering, this continuous like pounding on these judges, I'm wondering if it does cast a chill over some of their rulings. And I'm not saying they're doing anything blatantly unconstitutional, but maybe where it's a 50-50, they'll be like, might as well give it to the president. That's the only way he'll shut up on this, right? To be sure, though, there are judges standing up against him. There are judges standing up to him. Uh, Justice Roberts rebuked Trump verbally when it came to his attacks on Boasberg specifically. Where he warned the president that using impeachment as a form of payback really does threaten the impartiality of judges, and it does threaten the independence of the judiciary. You can't do that because let's assume you succeed. Then every ruling after you succeed in threatening and impeaching judges falls under a cloud of suspicion, right? Listen, if I could draw a bad analogy, right? Why is it that affirmative action is viewed so negatively? There's a lot of reasons to view it negatively. But one of the more important reasons to view it negatively is that anyone who benefits from affirmative action is forever has forever doubt cast on their abilities. Did they get their job because of affirmative action or because they were good at what they did? Would they have gotten that position without affirmative action? The answer might very well be yes, right? But it's a stain. It's something that hangs over the guy who got his job via, or the gal who got their jobs via affirmative action, right? Um, it's what it's what magats complain about when they talk about DEI hires, right? So now, if you have judges who are too scared to rule the way they want to rule because they're afraid of falling under impeachment, if a judge issues a ruling the president disagrees with, and the next thing you know, the House with its slight edge before the midterms, and then the Senate, if they nuke the filibuster, they start impeaching judges left and right. What does that mean for the remaining judges? Why wouldn't the libs in 26 and 28, when they kind of cycle their way back into a little more power, why would you be surprised if they all of a sudden decide to pack the Supreme Court with 25 liberal judges? Why would that surprise you? Why would you think of whining in that case? It's amazing to me. I've said it on every show I've ever been on. It's amazing to me how short the horizon is for a lot of these politicians. They can't see beyond their next election. Anything you do to make your life easier and to push through your agenda as a politician will be used against you the next cycle. If you're looking for reasons why the Senate, generally speaking, doesn't do things like nuking filibuster, which they may end up doing, but for now, at least, they're holding firm. Why it is they tend to resist the Trump's urgings a lot more than the House. It's because Senate terms of senators are 6 years. President's there for 4. Generally speaking, a senator will be in power longer than a president ever will. They have to be around for more than one cycle. They get to see, they'll go from Obama to Trump. They'll go from Trump to Biden. They'll go from Biden back to Trump again. I mean, if you think about those last 4 elections, it's a roller coaster of ideology. And getting the peaks of those ideologies are getting higher and higher, and the valleys are getting lower and lower between administrations. This country is whipsawing between policies. There's absolutely nothing consistent, and there's absolutely nothing reasonable about the last 4 administrations. Senators understand they'll be there across likely 2, 3, 4 presidential administrations. So they learn to maybe take a little bit longer view of things, right? So in that case, it makes you wonder now, right? Like, would they move to impeach a judge? I think unless it's for proven corruption or reasonable suspicion of corruption, literally taking kickbacks, accepting money for decisions, right? Unless it comes to something of that nature, I would hope that even if a judge makes the wrong decision, I'm using air quotes, the wrong decision, right? Whatever you think that might be, it might be reason to ridicule him, it may be reason to criticize him and to politically hammer the judge, but it wouldn't be cause for impeachment. I would hope so. I mean, I don't know what you guys think out there, but I would hope that that would be the case. All right, the last thing I want to end on. I've talked a lot nonstop. I haven't done this for years, and I apologize, but I'm starting to get a little hoarse in talking so much. Oh, that's good. Much appreciation to the makers of Diet A&W root beer. Fantastic. Okay. Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about, since it's in the news as well. How does this attack on the judicial branch, the blatant partisanship, the blatant um, loyalty to Trump in DOJ, how does that actually affect high profile cases? And what more high profile case do we have right now than the Epstein files, the Epstein case, right? Look, again, go to Liberty Lens, go to distantword.com, check out our Liberty Lens episode from this week. It was all about the Epstein files, the political maneuvering, the vote in Congress, Trump finally signing the bill to release the Epstein files, why it will work, why it won't work, right? That needed an episode unto itself. So Mike Termott and I did that. Please go check that out. I think it'll be worth your while. We did dive into it and look at the political ins and outs of it. But one of the things in the Epstein case is how it's being handled. Now, we already said Pam Bondi, who knows what she's doing, right? She was, uh, Pam Bondi, there she is again. You know, she, where's the transparency, Pam? This was part of the campaign promises. It's part of what you crowed about, and then all of a sudden, quiet. And in a rare instance of me agreeing with MAGA, I will say this to their credit: they are holding your feet to the fire. You promised them indictments. You promised them purple walks. You haven't done anything of the sort. Even for someone who's skeptical of the indictments you've been trying to chase and the indictments you've been trying to get, right? At the least you could do is deliver something legally defensible for the president's base. You haven't done that at all. No wonder none of them trust you. No wonder the only reason you're there is because Trump has a certain type that he wants to be surrounded with. We saw the other US attorneys up until now, right? Halligan and Habba, Pam Bondi. They all look like they came from the MILF section of the CD video store, right? It's hard not to notice that trend, right? But someone who is bucking the trend in that sense is the number two guy at DOJ, Todd Blanche. Now, this is another Trump loyalty list. Todd Blanche, this very pleasant looking fellow right here. Again, another personal attorney of the president. He was one of the president's attorney, if not the lead attorney, I believe, in his New York hush money case. With the Stormy Daniels situation. Where he paid her to keep quiet about an alleged affair she had with the president. Now, again, political payback, patronage. Okay, that's politics. It's dirty. We get it. He's now number two at DOJ. How does this affect things? Well, one of the things he inserted himself into was the quote proof that Trump had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. He had nothing to do with Epstein Island, none of that stuff. And again, I'm not even saying whether I think Trump was involved or not. That's irrelevant at this point. I'm talking about the procedure, the process. Blanche decides to go and have a jailhouse conversation with the only person arrested and convicted for anything related to Jeffrey Epstein's operation, and that was Ghislaine Maxwell. He sits down and quote interviews her for a couple hours, where she says, "Hey, President Trump, I never saw him. He never did anything inappropriate. Him and Jeffrey never got along. Whatever. She said everything that quote unquote exonerates the president in the Epstein matter. Hey, what's the problem, right? Well, here's the problem. A couple of days after she said that, she gets transferred. She gets to some club fed destination, I believe in Texas, where she's essentially living in a hotel. You know, she's under arrest. Her movements are restricted, but it's not a life of hardship by any accounting. She was moved to a very very minimum security, low low discomfort um, a penal institution, right? Truly a club fed. Now, for all his tough talk, for all of Bondi's tough talk, or for all of Cash Patel's tough talk, why would what should be one of the most despised, reviled people on the planet, Ghislaine Maxwell, the person who went out and recruited children, underage girls, for Maxwell to pimp out, right? Like she should be the one person. I can't think of anybody who would defend her, regardless of their political affiliation. Why is she given leniency? Because she, quote, exonerated Trump? Are we to believe that the president gave the number two spot at DOJ to his personal lawyer from the New York hush money case, and that this guy, as the associate attorney general, the number two guy at DOJ, he himself personally took a trip to interview Ghislaine Maxwell? Literally, there was no one else who could do that job. There was nobody at DOJ that would be more appropriate to send to do this interview. Do you see what I'm saying when I say the brazenness of the open disregard the president has for the judicial system, for the judicial branch? He just does not have any F's to give. He just does not care. And I don't care that there's people out there saying, well, Biden did this or Obama did that. Yeah, yeah, fine, fair enough. And the same people who say that have been bitching about those people, those administrations for a decade now between the two of them. I've never understood why MAGA would be like, yeah, what this guy did is shady, but let me tell you about other shady things that were done. Focus on what your guy's doing for now. The other person's scumminess doesn't excuse your guy's scumminess. That is nonsense. So why would Todd Blanche A be put in that position, B being in that position, be the guy to take a statement from one of the most disgusting, reviled people on the planet, which then results in that disgusting, reviled person being given leniency, and then it leaks out that she's being considered for clemency by the president, either a commutation or a pardon? The hell's going on here? And again, this is where a lot of political capital is being used for the express purpose of getting the president off the hook for something. I don't know what it is. I'd love to tell you that he engaged in something illegal, that there's some evidence that Trump was a constant visitor to Epstein Island, or that he had Epstein, he had takeout from Epstein's menu, so to speak. Like, I'd love to. I hate Trump. I would love to be able to tell you that I've discovered something to pin on Trump like that, or that other people have discovered credible stuff to that, because I hate Trump with a passion. People know that about me. I'm not going to lie about that. But even I am saying I can't see anything that Trump did that would be considered illegal. I see things that are morally dubious. Like, I do think, given everything that we've seen, he did know what Epstein was up to. And while he never participated, he never did anything to stop it. He didn't call any authorities. So why would someone in that position, if he's truly innocent, why did the president fight tooth and nail to kill Massey's bill in the House? And I don't mean just like politically kill it. I mean worked hard not only to kill the bill, but to get Massey primary. He's got his rich donor friends. He's got all of AIPAC trying to primary Massey. I mean, to the point where Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, these two MAGA women, again, under normal circumstances, I would say they're nuts, in my opinion. Okay. There's nothing I find appealing or admirable in those women, generally speaking, from a political perspective, right? But I will give them credit for one thing. Both of them stuck to their guns. They're like, hey, we got elected in part on full transparency for anything related to Epstein. And the president was trying to goon arm them into voting no on Massey's bill. And yeah, hey, it's tough for me to say this, but all credit, many kudos to Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Massey, of course. And also, to some lesser extent, another useless person in Congress that I view as useless, at least Nancy Mace. But at least she got in there and she said, "Hey, part of this is going to be, I'm for transparency and releasing all the Epstein files," and she stuck to her guns too. So I give them credit. Don't let. By the way, this is veering off a little bit, but don't let people fool you. Trump didn't sign this because it was the right thing to do. He signed this bill because it was veto proof, right? The Senate passed it with only one no vote, and the Senate unanimously consented to that. So, hey, now we'll see what the DOJ does. And again, this is where Trump's peppering and seeding the DOJ with his henchmen and his loyalists will pay off, right? Because part of that bill that Massey got passed, right? The Massey Rokana bill. One of the provisions in there is that documents and materials that are part of an ongoing investigation do not have to be disclosed. They can be redacted. We'll see now. We'll see if DOJ, just by dumb luck, decides to open an active investigation involving involving Epstein. It wouldn't surprise me, right? All Bondi and this guy Blanche have to do is to sit back and say, "Hey, we're launching an investigation to see how Bill Clinton was involved. We're launching an investigation to see how many times Hakeem Jeffries texted Epstein." And by the way, don't take my sarcasm here to indicate that I'm not 100% behind anyone who had anything to do with Epstein in terms of participating in his activities. Yeah, I want to see all of them behind bars. Every last one of them. I don't care who it is. I don't care if they're Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Green. I couldn't care less. Billionaires, millionaires, guys sweeping the streets. I couldn't care less. If they were involved in any way criminally with Epstein, out them all, get them all in prison. So I'm not objecting to the fact that there might be an investigation launched into Democrats who may have had ties with Epstein. What I am concerned about, though, is that, hey, if there's any material left that incriminates the president in any way whatsoever, again, not even for illegal activities, but just like say fundraising for someone who turned out being an Epstein client. Even if it's something ridiculous like that, or maybe if it's something that someone in Trump's inner circle, unbeknownst to Trump, contemporarily was involved with Epstein. Even if it's something embarrassing but not illegal, if it's just embarrassing politically to the president, but it's not illegal, right? don't do we really trust now that this highly politicized and loyalist DOJ hasn't already burned that stuff? Remember, everything the Trump administration accuses the Democrats of doing, they've done themselves, right? So remember back when they talked about finding burn bags, right? Cash Patel and Dan Benino, we saw the burn bags. We saw the burn bags. No, they don't tell you that that's standard operating procedure. But anyway, they saw the burn bags. Indictments are coming. We saw the burn bag. No indictments. Nobody's been taken to court over anything relating to that stuff. But they already planted the seed, right? They saw the burn bags. Do any of us really think that if anything existed that incriminates the president or anybody in his inner circle, that it still exists? Say though, you know, Mike on Liberty Lens said to me, I agree. We might agree that if anything did incriminate the president, it would have been scrubbed by now or destroyed, right? But in these cases, government is so big and so sprawling. A, there's stuff you don't know about that might incriminate the president, and B, there's stuff that incriminates the president that people forgot about, right? Because again, this stuff is so voluminous. There's so many people involved. There's so many different computer systems involved. Things get lost in the shuffle. Things get overlooked. Things get misfiled. Whatever. So there is the very real possibility, right? But generally speaking, I would expect that everything's been scrubbed, and anything that might even potentially come close to embarrassing the president. Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche can just say, yeah, that's part of an active ongoing investigation. Oh, yeah, which one? Oh, the one we opened this morning. And guess what? I doubt there's anything anybody can do about it. I mean, there are provisions in the law that say if you do redact information, if you refuse to provide information, you have to give a written report as to why. Hey, yeah, yeah, get some creative Gen AI to write up a creative excuse. That shouldn't take too long. But that's why it's important. That's why this issue of politicization of the judicial branch, the rampant partisanship at DOJ has got to come to an end. I mean, I don't know why something as critical as the DOJ is so beholden to political interests, right? I would think, like, listen, to draw a parallel, the chairman of the Federal Reserve is an appointed position. The president can't fire him or shouldn't be able to fire him. They want to, they have to find cause to get him fired, right? And we saw the president trying to get rid of Powell, trying to get rid of that other reserve chairwoman, one of the governors. I forget her name right now, but he's trying to get rid of them. He tried to get rid of the woman. Again, I apologize, I can't remember her name. Um, so the way they said, well, you can't just fire her. You got to fire her for cause. So they're like, oh yeah, uh, let's go dig through some mortgage records and find if she didn't dot her i's and cross her t's, and then that'll be cause and we can fire her. And that's still up. That's still being litigated. Why not have something similar for the attorney general? Right? That the only way that the president can nominate them, the Senate has to approve them, sure, just like any other cabinet position, but the president can't fire them unless for cause. The only way they can be removed from office is either for cause, where you have to go to a judge and go for cause, or you have to get them impeached. It wouldn't bulletproof the position, but at least it would make it a lot tougher, not just. And it's happened to a whole bunch of presidents, and it'll happen to a whole bunch of presidents where if the DOJ is truly acting independent or as independently as possible, the same way the Fed acts as independently as possible, right? Like, I mean, yes, libertarians and the Fed. I agree with you, true, but it's not going anywhere soon, right? So for as long as it's here, one of the attributes that our Federal Reserve has compared to every other central bank in the world is it's relatively independent of the president, of the government. It's relatively independent. I'm not saying it's completely independent. It's relatively independent. The more you push for that relative independence, at least you have some semblance of things functioning properly, right? So I would hope that at some point we could try to do that with the DOJ. with the attorney general. I hope. I hope. I know it won't happen anytime soon, but one can dream, can we not? All right, everyone. Thank you for putting up. This has been a Big John solo effort here on Free for All. Join us again next week if you don't mind, please. There will be, I guarantee you, we'll have co-hosts and guests who will be far more interesting than I am, and who will be providing the typical free for all show and energy that you're accustomed to. Until then, please don't forget to subscribe. Go to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button. Really appreciate it. If you're there now, go ahead and click on the subscribe button, probably down in that corner somewhere. If you're watching us on any other platform, you could subscribe by scanning that QR code up there. Please do that. Follow us on X at Distant Warrior. Follow us on X, so you'll keep up to date on all the episodes that drop during the week, and you'll be alerted that way. You can follow me, Big John, right there. Big John underscore SXM on X. If you're interested in any of the nonsense that falls out of my head during the week, feel free to follow me there. Until next week, when hopefully we'll have the Hodester back, Hody Johns, as well as some interesting guests. Thank you all for joining. Join us again next Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Until then, stay safe and peace, everyone.